Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Ethan, and I'm 36. My wife Emily and I have been married for 9 years. At least, we were until this Christmas. Every year, Emily's company throws this extravagant holiday party. She's in marketing and works for one of those startups that try too hard to be trendy. Her boss, Ryan, is the kind of guy who makes your skin crawl, always too slick, too charming, and way too familiar with everyone. I never liked the guy, but Emily always brushed it off. He's just friendly, she'd say. This year, she begged me to come with her. I wasn't thrilled, but I agreed. I figured it was the least I could do after skipping out on the past couple of years. I dressed up, put on a good face, and tried to be the supportive husband. But the moment we walked in, something felt off. Emily disappeared almost as soon as we arrived. I wandered around, sipping bad eggnog, trying to make small talk with people I didn't know. Every now and then, I'd spot her across the room, laughing too loudly at one of Ryan's jokes or standing way too close to him. At first, I tried to shake it off. She's always been outgoing, more comfortable in social situations than I am. But then I noticed little things. Her hand lingered on Ryan's arm when she laughed. His hand brushed the small of her back as he leaned in to whisper something. I wanted to believe it was nothing, but the knot in my stomach told me otherwise. The breaking point came when I went to look for her after an hour of awkward conversations. I found them outside on the patio, huddled close, talking in hushed voices. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but her body language screamed intimacy. She looked up at him the way she used to look at me. I stepped out, and they froze. Emily's face turned pale, while Ryan just smirked, like he didn't care that I'd caught them. I didn't make a scene. I just said, "We're leaving," and walked away. Emily followed me, stammering excuses about how I was overreacting and how it was just work stuff. The car ride home was silent, but my mind was racing. Every little moment I'd ignored or explained away came flooding back. Late nights at the office, the way she suddenly started dressing up more for work, how her phone was always face down on the counter. When we got home, I finally asked her straight out, "Are you cheating on me?" She denied it, of course, but her voice wavered, and her excuses didn't add up. "It's nothing," she said. "You're blowing this out of proportion." But I wasn't buying it. I didn't sleep that night. The woman I thought I knew, the life we'd built, it all felt like a lie. The morning after the party, Emily acted like nothing had happened. She made coffee, hummed some Christmas tune, and kissed me on the cheek like we were still the perfect couple. Meanwhile, I felt like a stranger in my own home, standing in the wreckage of what I thought was our marriage. I couldn't just let it go, so I brought it up again. "Emily, we need to talk about last night." She sighed, like I was the one making her life difficult. "Ethan, for the last time, there's nothing going on," she said, exasperated. "Ryan's my boss. I have to keep him happy. That's how the corporate world works." "That wasn't corporate, Emily," I shot back. "That was personal. The way you two were talking, the way he touched you, tell me the truth. What's going on?" Her face tightened, and her tone turned icy. "You're being paranoid. Do you know how bad this makes you look? Like some insecure husband who can't handle his wife being successful." It was like she flipped the script, turning it into a me problem. But I wasn't backing down. "If there's nothing to hide, then show me your phone." That hit a nerve. She clutched her phone to her chest like it was a lifeline. "I can't believe you'd even ask that," she said, her voice dripping with indignation. "Do you trust me or not?" The audacity of her response stunned me. I stood there, searching her face for some shred of guilt, some sign that she was telling the truth. But all I saw was defiance. "If you have nothing to hide, it shouldn't be a big deal," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "You don't get to police me, Ethan," she snapped, turning to leave the room. "When you're ready to stop acting crazy, let me know." She walked out, leaving me standing there like an idiot. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but her reaction only deepened my suspicions. That day, I started noticing more. She kept her phone glued to her side, only unlocking it when she thought I wasn't looking. She suddenly had to run errands that took hours, and when she came back, her stories never quite added up. By the end of the week, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers, so I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone while she was in the shower. My hands were shaking as I unlocked it using the passcode I'd memorized long ago. What I found wasn't explicit, but it was enough to confirm my worst fears. Texts from Ryan. Late-night messages that started with work stuff, but quickly veered into personal territory. Inside jokes, compliments about her appearance, and even one that read, "You're the only thing that makes this job bearable." I felt sick. I confronted her as soon as she stepped out of the bathroom. "So this is what I'm being paranoid about?" I said, holding up her phone. Her face went pale, and for a moment, I thought she'd finally come clean. Instead, she doubled down. "It's just texting. There's nothing physical, Ethan. Don't make this into something it's not." "But it could have been," I said, my voice breaking. "And don't tell me you haven't thought about it." She hesitated, and in that tiny pause, I had my answer. "I don't know what you want from me," she said finally. "But if you can't let this go, maybe you should think about whether you even want to be married to me." And just like that, she turned it around on me again, leaving me standing there, shattered. After our argument, Emily started avoiding me. She'd stay late at work more often, claiming it was end-of-year madness. I tried to believe her, I really did, but my gut told me otherwise. Her behavior was too off, too calculated. One night, while she was working late, I decided I couldn't just sit around and wait for the truth to come to me. I started digging. I went online and looked up Ryan's social media. His profiles were exactly what I expected: cocky captions, flashy cars, and way too many pictures of himself at company events. But one thing stood out: a photo from the Christmas party. There she was. My wife, standing next to Ryan, her hand lightly resting on his chest as he leaned in close. The caption read, "Best team in the business. Cheers to a great year ahead." It felt like a punch to the stomach. The image was public for anyone to see, like they weren't even trying to hide it. I saved the photo and waited for Emily to come home. When she walked through the door around midnight, she looked startled to see me still awake. "You're up late," she said, setting her bag down. "Yeah, couldn't sleep," I replied, my tone sharper than I intended. "How was work?" "Busy," she said quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Why? Are we really doing this again?" I pulled out my phone and showed her the picture. "Care to explain this?" She froze, her face a mix of guilt and annoyance. "Ethan, it's just a photo. Don't blow this out of proportion." "Out of proportion?" "Emily, look at the way you're standing with him. This isn't just some innocent work picture." She rolled her eyes, the way she always did when she wanted to dismiss me. "You're being ridiculous. Ryan takes pictures with everyone. It's part of his job." "Stop lying to me," I snapped, my voice louder than I meant. "I'm not stupid, Emily. I know there's more going on here." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time, she didn't even try to deny it. "Fine," she said coldly. "We've been talking, okay? But it's not what you think. I was going through a rough time, and Ryan was just there." "There? You mean, he was the shoulder to cry on while you were pushing me further away?" My hands were shaking. "How long has this been going on?" "It's not an affair, Ethan," she said, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. "We're just close. That's all." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "Do you even hear yourself? Do you know how pathetic this sounds?" She glared at me, arms crossed. "You don't understand how hard it's been, balancing work and everything else. Ryan actually listens to me, unlike you." "Don't you dare blame this on me," I shot back. "I've been here, Emily. I've always been here. You're the one who decided to turn to someone else." The room fell silent, the weight of her betrayal hanging between us. She eventually muttered something about being tired and went upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let her gaslight me into thinking this was my fault. Whatever this friendship with Ryan was, it had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to sit around and let it destroy me. The next day, I was still reeling from my confrontation with Emily. I hadn't slept. My mind kept replaying her excuses, her deflections, and that stupid picture. I knew I needed to clear my head, so I decided to take a walk. That's when my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. It was from Sarah, Ryan's wife. I didn't know her well, but we'd met at a couple of company events over the years. The message read, "Ethan, can we talk? It's about Ryan and Emily." My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, my mind racing. Had she figured it out too? Did she know more than I did? After a few minutes of debating, I replied, "Sure." "When?" She responded quickly, "I'm free this afternoon. Can we meet at the cafe on 4th? When I arrived, Sarah was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking as drained as I felt. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying, and she barely glanced up as I approached. "Thanks for meeting me," she said quietly, motioning for me to sit. "What's going on?" I asked, though I already had a sinking feeling I knew. She hesitated, her fingers nervously tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I found messages," she said finally, "between Ryan and your wife." My heart sank. "What kind of messages?" "Flirty," she said, her voice cracking. "More than flirty. He's been spending a lot of time with her. He tries to act like it's all professional, but I can tell it's not." I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and devastation. "I found messages too," I admitted. "And pictures." She swears it's just emotional, but I don't believe her. Sarah laughed bitterly. "That's exactly what Ryan says. He thinks I'm stupid enough to believe it hasn't gone further." We sat there for a moment, silent, each lost in our own thoughts. It was strange, finding comfort in the shared pain of someone who was supposed to be on the other side of this mess. "I don't know what to do," she said finally, her voice trembling. "We have 2 kids. I thought I could ignore it for their sake, but now I'm not sure." I took a deep breath, the weight of her words hitting me hard. "I don't have kids, but I know what you mean. I feel like everything I thought I knew about my life is a lie." She nodded, wiping a tear from her cheek. "I've thought about leaving, but it feels so final. What if I'm wrong? What if this is all just a misunderstanding?" Her words mirrored my own doubts. Despite everything I'd seen, part of me still wanted to believe Emily's lies. Wanted to believe this was something we could fix. But deep down, I knew better. "Sarah," I said, leaning forward. "You're not crazy. You're not overreacting. They've crossed a line, and it's not your fault." She looked at me, her eyes filled with gratitude, and something else. Hope, maybe? Or just the relief of knowing she wasn't alone. Before we parted ways, we exchanged numbers. "In case you hear anything," she said. "Or if you just need someone to talk to." "Same," I replied. "Thanks for reaching out." As I walked back to my car, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Emily and Ryan had shattered both our lives, but maybe, just maybe, Sarah and I could help each other pick up the pieces. After meeting with Sarah, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were spiraling out of control. I'd spent so much time second-guessing myself, questioning Emily's motives, and wondering if I was being unreasonable. But hearing Sarah confirm everything I'd feared, it was like a switch flipped in my brain. This wasn't in my head. Emily was lying, and I couldn't keep pretending otherwise. That night, Emily came home late again. She barely said hello before heading upstairs. I followed her, my heart pounding with anger and hurt. When she came out of the bathroom, I was waiting in the bedroom, holding my phone. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady but firm. She sighed, as if I was the one inconveniencing her. "Ethan, I'm exhausted. Can this wait until tomorrow?" "No," I snapped. "It can't. I met with Sarah today." That got her attention. Her eyes widened, and she froze in place. "Sarah," she repeated, her voice carefully neutral. "Yes. Ryan's wife. She knows, Emily. She found the messages." Emily sat down on the edge of the bed, her face pale. "What did she say?" "She said enough," I replied, my voice shaking with barely contained anger. "She told me about the messages, the late nights, the excuses. You can't keep lying to me, Emily. It's over." Her shoulders slumped, and for a moment, I thought she was going to come clean. But then she looked up at me, her expression defiant. "It's not what you think, Ethan. Sarah's just jealous. She's always been insecure about Ryan, and now she's dragging me into her paranoia." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Just stop. I've seen the messages, Emily. I've seen the way you act around him. This isn't just in Sarah's head, it's happening, and you know it." She stood up, crossing her arms defensively. "So what if I've been texting him? It's not like I'm sleeping with him, Ethan. You're blowing this way out of proportion." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You think this is about whether or not you've crossed some arbitrary line. You've betrayed me, Emily. You've betrayed our marriage. Her face twisted with frustration. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she said quietly. I needed someone to talk to, and Ryan was there. And I wasn't. I shot back. I've been here, Emily. Every single day. But you didn't want to talk to me, did you? You wanted the attention, the validation. Don't pretend this is about anything other than your own selfishness. She didn't respond, and for a long moment, the only sound in the room was my heavy breathing. Finally, I spoke again, my voice low and cold. I can't do this anymore. I'm done. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't try to stop me. She just stood there, silent, as I walked out of the room. That night, I slept on the couch. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I couldn't keep living like this. Emily had made her choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. Filing for divorce felt surreal. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was the end of a life I thought I'd always have. But there was no way I could stay in a marriage built on lies. I couldn't unsee the texts, unhear Emily's excuses, or undo the damage her betrayal had caused. I met with a lawyer the day after my blow-up with Emily. The lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Kate, walked me through the process. She explained the paperwork, the timelines, and what I could expect. It was overwhelming, but she was patient, answering every question I had, even the ones I didn't realize I'd been holding in. Do you have evidence of the affair? Kate asked. I hesitated. I have some texts I found on her phone. And there's this picture from the Christmas party that feels incriminating. She nodded. That helps. Infidelity can play a role in divorce settlements, depending on your state's laws. It's good to have documentation. I felt a pang of shame handing over the screenshots, like I was airing our dirty laundry. But the truth was, Emily had already thrown our marriage into the mud. I was just trying to clean up the mess. When I got home, Emily was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone like nothing had changed. For a second, I wondered if she was waiting for me to forgive her, to act like we could go back to normal. But I couldn't let that happen. I saw a lawyer today, I said, breaking the silence. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide. What? I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice steady. It's over, Emily. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she didn't know what to say. Finally, she set her coffee down and crossed her arms. You're really going to throw everything away over a few texts? It wasn't just texts, I said, my anger bubbling to the surface. It was the lies, the sneaking around, the complete lack of respect for me or our marriage. This isn't about the messages, Emily. It's about trust, and you destroyed it. She scoffed, rolling her eyes. Fine. Do whatever you want. But don't act like you're some saint. You've always been controlling, Ethan. This is just your way of punishing me. Her words stung, but I didn't let them show. This isn't about punishment. It's about moving on. You've made your choices, Emily, and now I'm making mine. She didn't respond, and I walked away, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and a strange sense of relief. Later that evening, Sarah called. How are you holding up? She asked, her voice soft but steady. I filed for divorce, I said. I couldn't keep living like this. I'm proud of you, she said, and I could hear the genuine warmth in her voice. It's not an easy decision, but it's the right one. We ended up talking for over an hour, sharing our frustrations, our fears, and our hopes for what life might look like after this. It felt good to talk to someone who truly understood what I was going through. By the time we hung up, I felt lighter, like I'd taken the first real step toward reclaiming my life. In the days after filing for divorce, the house felt like a battlefield. Emily and I barely spoke, and when we did, it was short and tense. I'd moved into the guest room, but the walls still felt like they were closing in. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional sound of Emily's phone buzzing, probably Ryan. I tried to focus on the logistics, sorting through paperwork, dividing assets, and figuring out what my life was going to look like after this. It was exhausting, emotionally and physically. But in the middle of all the chaos, there was one person who kept checking in, Sarah. She'd text me every day, just small things at first. How are you holding up? Or let me know if you need to vent. It was comforting to know someone out there understood what I was going through. One evening, after another icy interaction with Emily, I decided to take Sarah up on her offer. I texted her, Do you want to grab coffee or something? I could really use someone to talk to. She replied almost instantly, how about tonight? Same place as before. When I arrived at the cafe, Sarah was already there, stirring a cup of tea. She looked tired but composed, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm raging in my life. Hey, I said, sitting down across from her. Hey, she replied, giving me a small smile. Rough day. I laughed bitterly. Rough week. Rough month, honestly. She nodded. I get it. Ryan's been difficult, to say the least. He's been trying to spin this whole thing like I'm the problem. Of course he is, I said, shaking my head. Emily's doing the same thing. It's like they're reading from the same script. We talked for hours, sharing stories about our respective spouses and the lies they'd told to cover their tracks. It felt strangely cathartic, like airing out a wound that had been festering for too long. You know, Sarah said after a while, her voice thoughtful, it's funny how they tried to isolate us, but here we are, helping each other through this. Yeah, I said, smiling for what felt like the first time in weeks. I guess that's one good thing to come out of this mess. As we parted ways, Sarah gave me a hug. It wasn't romantic or complicated, it was just two people finding comfort in their shared pain. Back at home, Emily was on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She didn't even look up as I walked in. I stood there for a moment, wondering if she even cared about what was happening between us. Late night, she said finally, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Yeah, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. I met up with someone who actually listens to me. She flinched, just slightly, but didn't say anything. I headed to the guest room, feeling a strange mix of guilt and satisfaction. The days turned into weeks, and the tension between Emily and me only grew. She started staying out later, and I stopped asking where she was going. I didn't want to know anymore. Whatever shred of hope I had for reconciliation was gone, replaced by a quiet determination to move on. Sarah and I kept in touch. At first, our conversations were about our respective divorces, venting, strategizing, and supporting each other through the chaos. But as time went on, our talks started to feel different. Less like two people consoling each other and more like two people connecting on a deeper level. One night, she called me. Hey, she said, her voice soft but steady. I was thinking, would you want to come over for dinner? Nothing fancy, just some company. It's been a rough day. I hesitated. On one hand, I wanted to see her. On the other, I knew how it might look, how it might feel. But in the end, loneliness won out. Sure, I said. What time? When I arrived at Sarah's house, she greeted me with a warm smile and a glass of wine. The smell of something delicious wafted from the kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a little less like a wreck. Come on in, she said, leading me to the dining table. It was simple but cozy, with candles and a bottle of wine already open. I hope you like chicken parmesan. It's one of the few things I'm decent at cooking. It smells amazing, I said, and for a moment, it felt like I was stepping into a different life, a life where things were normal and uncomplicated. Over dinner, we talked about everything, our marriages, our frustrations, our fears about what the future held. She told me about her kids, how they were handling everything, and I told her about my struggle to let go of the anger I felt toward Emily. You know, she said after a while, swirling her wine glass thoughtfully, it's strange. For so long, I thought Ryan was the love of my life. And now, I barely recognize the man I married. I know what you mean, I said. Emily and I used to be so in sync. Now it feels like we're speaking different languages. She nodded, her eyes meeting mine. Do you ever feel like, maybe this is a chance to start over? To figure out what really matters? I didn't know how to respond. All I knew was that sitting there with her, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. After dinner, we moved to the couch, the conversation flowing easily as we sipped the last of the wine. At some point, there was a lull, and we just sat there, the silence stretching between us. I glanced over at her, and for a moment, I thought about leaning in, but I stopped myself. I should probably go, I said, standing up and setting my glass on the coffee table. Sarah looked up at me, something unreadable in her expression. Yeah, she said softly. Probably. As I walked to the door, she followed me, and for a second, I thought she was going to say something. Instead, she gave me a small smile and said, "Good night, Ethan. Thanks for coming over." "Good night, Sarah," I replied, stepping out into the cool night air. As I walked to my car, I couldn't help but wonder what might have happened if I'd stayed a little longer. The days after dinner at Sarah's house were a strange mix of guilt and clarity. I couldn't stop thinking about her, how easy it felt to talk to her, how she seemed to understand me in a way Emily hadn't in years. At the same time, I kept questioning myself. Was I crossing a line? Or had Emily's betrayal already broken every line there was? Emily, for her part, seemed oblivious. She was either out of the house or glued to her phone, barely acknowledging my presence. It was like we were two strangers sharing a space, waiting for the paperwork to finalize so we could officially go our separate ways. One evening, as I was scrolling through emails, Sarah texted me, "Hey, are you free to talk? Just had a rough day." I called her immediately. "What's going on?" I asked, concern lacing my voice. "It's Ryan," she said, her tone weary. "He's been trying to spin this narrative that I'm some unstable, bitter wife who's dragging him through the mud. He even told our mutual friends that I'm making things up to hurt his career." "That's disgusting," I said, anger bubbling up. "After everything he's done, he still thinks he's the victim?" She sighed. "It's just exhausting, you know? I'm trying to keep it together for the kids, but some days it feels like too much." "Listen," I said, leaning back in my chair. "You're not alone in this, okay? If you ever need someone to back you up or just be there for you, I'm here." "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." A few days later, Sarah invited me over again, this time to help her move some furniture around. It felt like a harmless favor, but as soon as I walked into her house, I could feel the tension. We joked and laughed as we rearranged her living room, but every now and then, there was a moment when our hands would brush or our eyes would linger just a little too long. When we were done, we sat on the couch, both a little out of breath. "Thanks for the help," she said, smiling. "I probably would have thrown my back out if I'd tried to do that alone." "No problem," I said, feeling the warmth of her gratitude. "It's nice to feel useful for once." She looked at me then, her expression softening. "Ethan, you're a good man. Don't let Emily, or anyone else, make you feel otherwise." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For so long, I'd felt like I was drowning in Emily's lies, like I was the one who had failed. But here was someone who saw me differently, who reminded me that I was still worth something. "Thanks, Sarah," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "That means a lot." For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us heavy but not uncomfortable. Then, without thinking, I reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. Instead, she intertwined her fingers with mine, her touch sending a rush of warmth through me. "This feels complicated," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly. "I know," I replied, squeezing her hand gently. "But it also feels right. We didn't kiss that night. We didn't even talk about what was happening between us. But as I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that we'd crossed a line we couldn't uncross. After that night at Sarah's, I couldn't stop thinking about her. Every text, every call felt different now, charged with something unspoken but undeniable. I knew we were walking a fine line, and part of me worried about what might happen if we crossed it. But another part of me, the part that felt alive for the first time in months, didn't want to stop. Emily, meanwhile, was completely checked out. She'd come home late, throw her bag on the counter, and disappear into the bedroom without a word. One night, I heard her on the phone with someone, her voice low and conspiratorial. I didn't need to hear the details to know who it was. Ryan. The confirmation didn't sting like it used to. It just made me more certain that moving on was the right decision. One evening, Sarah called me, her voice strained. "Ethan, can you come over? I need to talk to someone, and I don't know who else to call." "Of course," I said without hesitation. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. When I arrived, she was sitting on her front porch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked up as I approached, her eyes red from crying. "Thanks for coming," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting down beside her. She took a shaky breath. "Ryan's been pushing for shared custody. He's trying to paint me as this unstable person who can't take care of the kids. It's like, he's punishing me for standing up to him." I clenched my fists, anger rising in my chest. "That's ridiculous. Anyone who knows you can see how much you love your kids. He's just trying to manipulate the situation." "I know," she said, wiping a tear from her cheek. "But it's still terrifying. I can't lose them, Ethan." "You won't," I said firmly. We'll make sure of it. She gave me a weak smile, and for a moment, we just sat there, the cool night air wrapping around us. Then, almost without thinking, I reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. She froze, her eyes locking with mine. "Ethan," she began, but I cut her off. "Sarah, I know this is messy. I know we're both still trying to figure things out. But I can't ignore how I feel anymore." She hesitated, her expression a mix of fear and longing. "This scares me," she admitted. "What if we're just two broken people clinging to each other because it's easier than facing the pain alone?" "Maybe we are," I said honestly. "But that doesn't mean what we're feeling isn't real." For a moment, I thought she might pull away, but then she leaned in, her lips meeting mine in a kiss that was hesitant at first but quickly deepened. It wasn't perfect, there was too much emotion, too much history between us, but it felt like the first honest thing I'd experienced in months. When we finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against mine, her breath warm against my skin. "I don't know where this is going," she said softly. "But I want to find out." "Me too," I replied, holding her close. That night, I drove home feeling a mix of exhilaration and guilt. I knew this was uncharted territory, and I didn't have all the answers. But for the first time since Emily's betrayal, I felt like there was a chance for something better, a chance to rebuild, even if it wasn't the life I'd planned. The morning after kissing Sarah, I woke up with a strange mix of emotions. Part of me felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted. But another part of me couldn't shake the nagging voice in the back of my head, whispering, "What if this only makes things messier?" Emily barely noticed anything different about me, not that she would have. She spent most of her time buried in her phone or out of the house. I'd stopped asking questions about where she was or who she was with. It didn't matter anymore. My focus was on moving forward, and figuring out what exactly that meant with Sarah. A few days later, Sarah and I met up again. This time, we decided to be honest about what we were feeling. Sitting across from each other at a quiet park, we talked about everything, the guilt, the fear, the hope. "I'm not trying to rush into anything," Sarah said, her voice steady but nervous. "But I also don't want to pretend like what's happening between us isn't real." "Me neither," I admitted. "I care about you, Sarah. And I don't think this is just some rebound. But I also know we have to be careful." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. "I just don't want to hurt anyone else in the process, especially the kids." That hit me hard. As much as I wanted to focus on what was growing between us, I couldn't ignore the larger context, the complicated web of relationships we were both untangling. Later that week, things took an unexpected turn. Emily came home earlier than usual, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she actually seemed interested in talking. "We need to figure out what we're doing with the house," she said, sitting down at the kitchen table. I sat across from her, wary. "What do you mean?" "Well, the divorce is moving forward," she said matter-of-factly. "Are we selling it? Are you buying me out? Or should I?" The thought of selling the house made my stomach churn. It wasn't just bricks and mortar, it was the place where I thought we'd build a life together. But now it felt tainted, like a constant reminder of everything we'd lost. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I haven't figured that out yet." "Well, you need to," she said, her tone sharper than I expected. "I'm not going to keep living in limbo, Ethan." Her words stung, but they also lit a fire under me. I couldn't let her dictate the terms of this anymore. I needed to take control of my own future. That night, I called Sarah. "She's starting to push about the house," I said. "I don't know if I can stay here. It feels wrong." "Then don't," Sarah said simply. "Start fresh somewhere else. Somewhere that feels like yours, not hers." Her words made sense, but the idea of leaving the house still felt daunting. It wasn't just about moving, it was about letting go of a part of my life that I wasn't ready to say goodbye to. The next time Sarah and I met, things felt different, more serious. We weren't just two people navigating our pain anymore. We were two people actively choosing to move forward, together. What if we didn't have to do this alone? I asked her, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we figured out what's next, together?" Sarah didn't answer right away, but the small smile that crept across her face told me everything I needed to know. The idea of starting fresh was terrifying, but it was also the only thing that made sense. I couldn't stay in the house with all its memories, and I didn't want to keep circling the drain with Emily. If I was going to move forward, I had to make a clean break, and Sarah's encouragement was the push I needed. The next morning, I called my lawyer, Kate. "I want to sell the house," I said firmly. "How do we make that happen?" She walked me through the process, explaining that we'd need Emily's agreement and a mediator to handle the sale. "It might not be quick," she warned. "But if you're both on board, it'll be smoother." I knew convincing Emily wouldn't be easy, but when I brought it up that evening, her reaction surprised me. "Fine," she said with a shrug. "It's probably for the best. I don't want to stay here, either." For once, we were on the same page. It was a strange, almost surreal moment, sitting across from her and discussing logistics like two business partners instead of a broken couple. But the lack of animosity was a relief, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could get through this without tearing each other apart. That weekend, Sarah and I met at a quiet cafe to talk about what came next. I hadn't told her about the decision to sell the house yet, and when I did, her face lit up. "That's a big step," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "How do you feel about it?" "Nervous," I admitted. "But also, relieved. It feels like the right move." We spent hours talking about everything, our plans, our fears, and the tentative hope we both felt for the future. At one point, Sarah hesitated, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" I asked. She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking, maybe it's time I started making changes too. Ryan's been dragging his feet on the divorce, and I think it's because he doesn't believe I'll go through with it. But I'm done waiting. I need to take control of my life, like you're doing." Her determination was inspiring, and it made me realize how much we were helping each other find the strength to move forward. The next few weeks were a blur of paperwork and meetings with realtors. Emily and I kept our interactions civil, though there was still an undercurrent of tension. She seemed to sense that I was pulling away, not just physically, but emotionally, and I could tell it bothered her, even if she wouldn't admit it. One night, as I was packing up some of my things, she walked into the guest room. "You've been different lately," she said, leaning against the doorframe. "I'm moving on," I replied simply. She didn't respond right away, and when she did, her voice was softer than I expected. "Do you ever think about what went wrong? How we ended up here?" "All the time," I said, meeting her gaze. "But I'm done trying to figure it out. What's done is done." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "I guess I just thought, never mind." For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. Despite everything, this was the woman I'd once planned to spend my life with. But that chapter was over, and I wasn't going to let her pull me back into the past. The house went on the market faster than I expected. Emily and I worked with a realtor to stage it, cleaning up the place that had once been our home. It was strange, walking through the rooms and seeing them stripped of the life we'd built together. Every corner held a memory, but instead of feeling nostalgic, I felt ready. Ready to let it go. Buyers came through, one after another, and within a few weeks, we had an offer. Emily and I sat across from the mediator to finalize the sale. The whole process felt clinical, like we were just ticking boxes on a form. But when the papers were signed, there was a moment of silence, and Emily looked up at me. "That's it then," she said, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. "Yeah," I replied. "That's it." She didn't say anything else, and I didn't stick around to analyze the look on her face. I had what I needed, a clean slate. After the sale closed, I moved into a small apartment on the other side of town. It wasn't much, a one-bedroom with outdated appliances and creaky floors, but it felt like mine. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. Sarah came over to help me unpack one evening. She brought a bottle of wine and a pizza, and we spent hours turning my tiny space into something that resembled a home. "It's not the Four Seasons," I joked, gesturing at the mismatched furniture and bare walls. She smiled, tucking a stray hair behind her ear. "It's perfect. You're starting over, and that's all that matters." As the evening went on, the tension between us grew. We'd been dancing around our feelings for weeks, afraid to push too far, too fast. But now, in the quiet of my new apartment, everything felt different. At one point, Sarah set down her wine glass and turned to me. "Ethan, what are we doing?" I looked at her, my heart pounding. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I know that I care about you. And I know that this, whatever it is, feels right." She hesitated, searching my face for something. "I care about you too," she said finally. But I'm scared. What if this is just us trying to fill the holes our marriages left behind? I took her hands in mine, my voice steady. Maybe it started that way. But it's more than that now. Don't you feel it? She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I do. And that's what scares me the most. We didn't kiss that night. Instead, we sat together on the couch, holding hands and talking about everything, our fears, our hopes, and the future we were both trying to build. A week later, Emily called me. Can we meet? She asked, her tone uncharacteristically soft. I hesitated, unsure if I was ready to face her again. But something in her voice told me it was important. Okay, I said. When and where? We met at a coffee shop, and she looked different. There was no edge to her, no sharpness. Just a woman who seemed as lost as I had been. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, stirring her coffee absently. For everything. For the lies, the hurt. All of it. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to tell her how much pain she'd caused. But another part of me just felt tired. Thank you, I said finally. I hope you find what you're looking for, Emily. She nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. You too, Ethan. After my conversation with Emily, I felt lighter, like a weight I'd been carrying for months had finally been lifted. The chapter with her was closed, and I was ready to start writing the next one. A few days later, I invited Sarah over. It wasn't anything fancy, just takeout and a movie, but I knew it was time to stop holding back. When she arrived, she seemed nervous, her eyes darting around my small apartment as if looking for something familiar. Relax, I said with a smile, handing her a glass of wine. It's just me. She laughed softly and sat on the couch, tucking her legs underneath her. For a while, we watched the movie in comfortable silence, but I could feel the tension building between us. When the credits rolled, I turned to her. Sarah, I don't want to keep dancing around this. I care about you. And I want to see where this can go, if you're ready. She looked at me, her expression conflicted. Ethan, I care about you too. But this still feels fragile. What if we ruin it? Or what if we don't? I countered, my voice soft but certain. We've both been through so much. Maybe we deserve to take a chance on something good. She hesitated, then leaned in, her hand brushing against mine. Okay, she whispered. Let's try. I pulled her into a kiss, and this time, there was no hesitation. It wasn't perfect, nothing about our situation was, but it felt real. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt hopeful about the future.